Of course, we all know swords are sharp, but how sharp should they be? Well, today I'm going to be discussing my ideas on how sharp these modern-made replicas should be. So in my recent review of the Maciej Kopciusz's arming sword, I mentioned that it was not particularly sharp, and I found that to be a problem. It doesn't really cut much. It can do a little tearing sometimes, but it's not very sharp. It really could be sharper. That commentary seemed to reignite the debate about sword sharpness and how sharp they should be. Mr. Kopciusz wrote an article that he posted on his website. I should point out that article was not written in response to my review. I talked to Mr. Kopciusz about it, and he said it was something he'd been working on for the past several years, and my review just kind of provided the incentive to finish it. And in that article, Mr. Kopciusz talks about how swords needed to have a fairly durable edge to survive strikes against other swords, against armor, that kind of thing. And, he's got access to a lot of historical swords to study. He has a lot of experience making swords. He has much more expertise than I do. Personally, while I may disagree with some of his conclusions, he has far more expertise in the matter than I do. And that kind of brings me to my take on sword sharpness. I'm not going to talk about historical accuracy when it comes to this sharpness on swords anymore, because I don't have access to historical swords, the antiques that people can base their studies on. What's more, I don't really have the inclination to do testing on reasonably historical accurate armor and targets, such as wrapping some kind of meat in textile armor and chain and plate and whatever. There's a whole lot that goes into it, and I just don't have either the inclination, the access, the time, the money, any of those. So, I don't think it makes much sense for me to talk about historical accuracy when it comes to sharpness anymore. What I can talk about is the sharpness as it relates to what I use swords for. What do I use swords for? Backyard cutting, targeting things like pool noodles, water bottles. I'll do paper cut tests, and recently doing a little bit of tatami. So I can talk at least marginally intelligently about cutting targets such as those. I can't talk about what it would be like to use a sword in anger the way they were used historically. In fact, really, let's be real. Nobody in this day and age can truly talk about that. They can extrapolate, they can study, but they don't know what it was like either, because swords are antiquated. They're no longer a useful tool. They're a luxury item that we can enjoy and study and learn about, but we're not going to know what they were like in actual use. Unless you believe the zombie apocalypse is coming, of course. Want to help out my channel and support a great cause? Then check out my merch store at www.alien2.com. 25% of the profits of every sale will be donated to the American Cancer Society, and the rest will be used to help the channel continue to grow. Thanks for your support. So when I do my reviews and I talk about the sharpness, I'm going to keep using paper cuts. If I do this, and the sword struggles like this one does, it's cutting, but I kind of have to push on it and it does a little bit of tearing. That to me tells me the edge is not particularly polished. That's much more tearing than cutting. So that tells me this sword is not going to be a particularly great backyard cutter. Now, it is possible to have a polished edge that will cut paper nicely that will not do good jobs cutting other targets. That can still be instructive to know how polished the edge is and how the final edge geometry is formed into the apex of the edge. And counter to that, when I test a sword sharpness and it just slices through like butter, that tells me the edge is very polished and it's quite sharp, and it probably will do quite a good job cutting targets that I enjoy cutting. So that's what I'm looking for when I test the sharpness on my swords. I'm not going to be doing destructive tests. I'm not going to be doing abusive tests. I pay way too much money for these swords to then go and abuse them. I will use them against the targets I like to use them for, and if that, I'll talk about them, and if that's useful for you, then I'm glad that I can help inform your decision making with the type of cutting that I like to do. But in terms of historical accuracy, I don't know. I don't personally think anybody knows. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the subject. You know, everybody has an opinion on it, and I'm going to go ahead and link in the description Mr. Kopchiwicz's article, Scalagram's video testing against textile armor, another video I saw recently testing against textile armor. You know, I would urge anybody who is interested in sword sharpness to do their research, but also decide what you want to use the sword for. I'm a backyard cutter. I cut water bottles, pool noodles, occasional tatami, and I use paper as an illustrative aid to see how sharp the sword is. And that's what I'm going to focus on in the future. No more historical accuracy in terms of sword sharpness. I hope this video helps set the expectations when I discuss sharpness for my reviews. Until next time, Alien Toot out.